customer lifetime value is probably the most central and the one most widely used measure in order to determine the value of a customer and to classify customers according to their value, for example, in form of a pyramid. However, the problem of customer lifetime value is that it assumes that the only way in which a customer can generate value for the firm is by buying products or services. And recently, especially in the past decade, more and more people have challenged this view. So look at the following slide. You have a customer who is customer one, and customer one purchases products and services. We have a size of wallet, a share of wallet, a contribution margin, a lifetime acquisition costs, all of the elements we just discussed, and all of these together make the CLV of customer one, which we call CLV1. And you remember, the sum of all the CLVs of all the customer gives the customer equity. However, there are also other ways in which customers can generate value for firms. Look at customer two. Let me give you the following example. Assume I am giving my old AirPods away to some teenager in my family, my nephew, let's say. Assume for a moment that the person I'm giving these AirPods to would have never purchased AirPods him or herself. And also, for one reason or the other, this person will never buy an Apple product him or herself. So from the perspective of Apple, this person has never been a customer, would never have been a customer, and will never be a customer. So the CLV of this person is 0. However, assume that this person likes those AirPods and probably spends an hour every week on an online help forum giving other people advice on how to use their AirPods. Or probably writes an email to Apple and telling Apple something that is good about the AirPods and something that is bad about the AirPods. What customer 2 does is customer 2 provides an understanding of preferences, for example, having brand-related discussions with either the company or in a brand community. And he or she may help the company to save customer service costs by helping other customers. And even if customer 2 never buys the product him or herself, so technically the CLV of customer 2 is 0, what customer 2 probably does is customer 2 helps other people understand the product better, and probably it is those other customers who buy more products in return. So the effect that customer 2 has on the customer equity of the firm is not direct through CLV, but it is indirect by changing the CLV of another customer. In this example, customer 1 benefits from the information provided by customer 2, and the CLV changes to CLV 1 star. You call the effect of customer 2 and the value that customer 2 generates the customer knowledge value. The customer knowledge value is just the difference between the initial CLV 1 and the higher CLV 1 star. You know this phenomenon, however, usually out of a very different context, and that is word of mouth. Nowadays, companies are very interested in encouraging the spread of positive word of mouth among people. Very often you try to generate positive word of mouth at the early stages of a product life cycle when a product is new, because you want to use customers to spread the word about the new product. Word of mouth is a very loose term. It can occur in multiple different forms. Word of mouth can be verbally. I can recommend a product to you. Check out Apple. It's a good product. It's a good company. It can be through observational learning. You may see a product on another person, a pair of clothing, for example, and without ever having a verbal conversation with that person, you may be influenced by wanting to buy that product. Maybe normative influence, if let's say a group of people jointly decides that they all need to wear the same type of clothing. Or you may see it on social media, which is the classical influencer marketing on, let's say, Instagram or TikTok. Customer 3 only spreads word of mouth. Customer 3, we assume for a moment, doesn't buy him or herself. So very similar to customer 2, the CLV of customer 3 is 0. However, customer 3 impacts other people. Customer 3 impacts customer 4. And customer 4 may either become a customer of the firm, so there may be acquisition effects. 4 may start to buy products 4 would have never purchased otherwise, because 4 has seen those products and been exposed to word of mouth of products with respect to customer 3. Customer 4 may be developed. They might increase their size or share of wallet in response to the word of mouth of customer 3, which also leads to higher revenue, or they may increase their lifetime. They may have retention effects. It doesn't matter whether it's an acquisition and development or retention effect. What matters is that this customer generates a CLV4, either an entirely new CLV4, if it's an acquisition effect, or a higher CLV4 than customer 4 would have generated otherwise, very similar to the difference between CLV1 and CLV1 star. The effect of customer 3, very similar to the one of customer 2, goes through customer 4, and we call the impact of customer 4's social value, the value of the word of mouth spread by customer 3. Now, companies today increasingly realize the importance of word of mouth, and they have developed a multitude of different programs in order to encourage customers to spread word of mouth. There are seeding programs, for example. You have product seeding, where you give a free product to an influencer, for example, on Instagram, in the hope that he or she spreads word of mouth about the product. However, the problem of product seeding is it can be very costly. You need to give a free product, so there are actually the product production costs. There may be logistics costs getting the product to the customer. Might actually be very complicated if the product is large or heavy. So sometimes companies use viral marketing instead, in which they don't encourage influencers to spread word of mouth about the product, but they encourage them to spread a message like a video, for example. There are referral programs, referral reward programs, where companies pay other customers to acquire customers. Bring a friend, you get $5 and your friend gets $5. Business reference programs, where companies use other customers as advertising tools. You have this very, very frequently in B2B, when one company says, we are also doing business with this and this client. SAP is working with Lufthansa, for example. You have affiliate marketing, which is the payment of monetary incentives for referring a person to a certain website. And finally, you have recommendation programs that can be narrow, either on smaller social networks like Facebook, or they can be broad, like dedicated review sites, word of mouth spread to dedicated review sites like TripAdvisor or Amazon or the like. The problem with these word of mouth programs is that very often firms do not really know how to measure the value of these programs. This is why most firms who use word of mouth programs these days simply count what is called engagement. They may count the likes or the shares of certain messages. But the problem with this is that likes and shares are not really relevant. What is relevant is the incremental amount of money that a firm has earned, the CLV or the customer equity. But calculating this incremental amount of money can be really, really tricky. So you have the word of mouth program that targets participant A. Note that participant A can either be an existing customer, so probably A has already purchased the product of the firm, or a non-customer. Probably A has never purchased any product of the firm and never would have A purchased any product. The first effect that word of mouth programs usually have is they change the CLV of the participant. If you decide to participate in the word of mouth program of a firm, you have a higher likelihood of either starting to buy the product yourself, if you have been a non-customer, or consume the product more intensely if you have been a customer. You call this the direct value, the change in the CLV of participant A. It can be sizable in some settings, but obviously this is not the main point why we do word of mouth programs. We do word of mouth programs that participant A talks. Now A may talk to B, who doesn't do anything except of listening to what A says and tailoring it to another person, or A may talk to customer C, who in response to the word of mouth gets acquired, developed, or retained, as we discussed on the previous slide. Customer C generates new CLV. And if you combine the CLV of customer C with the direct value of customer A, we get a higher customer equity than we had before. We may get that higher customer equity because we now have more customers, because some customers have been acquired that would not have been acquired otherwise. So there is an effect on the number of customers. And or there may be an effect of the CLV due to development and retention. The CLV of the customers we already have may be higher. And there may even be a discounting effect. If customers are acquired sooner rather than later, their revenues are discounted less, which also has an impact on their CLV. This leads to an amplified customer equity And that is the value of the word of mouth program. Now, the problem, however, is that customer A, B, and C are in most cases a part of a very large social networks where there are multiple participants in the word of mouth program. So it can be really hard to attribute the value of customer A and the amplified customer equity to one specific customer. Conceptually, it's pretty easy, because what we need to conceptually do is we need to look at the amplified customer equity, and we need to subtract the customer equity that we would have gotten had customer A never talked. So we need to compare the real world in which customer A participates in the word of mouth program to a would-be world where everything is equal except that customer A never participated in the program. Think of it like a parallel universe type of thing. And the difference in customer equity between the real world and the would-be world is the word of mouth program value. Now, obviously, very reasonable question that you can ask right now is, how should we do this? How should I calculate the customer equity in a would-be world? How can I assess this? Well, there is a technically a bit more sophisticated way of doing this. It's called agent-based modeling. And in the supplementary readings of session 2, you have one article that explains this in a bit more detail. But there's also an easy way that you can use in most settings. And this easy way consists of 4 steps. First, you need to establish how important word of mouth is in your specific industry. And you can do this by running a survey in which you ask a very simple question. How likely is it that you would have purchased this product or service without word of mouth? For example, you ask everyone who purchased your product in the past quarter, how likely is it that you would have purchased this product without word of mouth? From 1 very unlikely to 5 very likely. If it is very unlikely that people would have purchased the product without word of mouth, this means word of mouth is really important. And if it is very likely, this means word of mouth is really unimportant. And then you can simply count. For example, out of all the customers that you have acquired in the past period, in the past quarter, you can say that 8,000 customers were primarily impacted by word of mouth, for example, because they gave you answers 1 or 2. It's important to note that word of mouth programs should be used when word of mouth is roughly in the middle. You do not want to use a word of mouth program when word of mouth is already very, very important, because then people already talk a lot about the product, and it's really, really hard to amplify this conversation even more. You can imagine this by seeing that if word of mouth is already very important, organic equity, customer equity is already high, so there's very limited room to amplify. On the other hand, this word of mouth is really unimportant in a given sector, then there's really not much potential for amplification either, because the component of word of mouth itself is not relevant. So you rather want to target the markets where there is a medium importance. In the next step, you need to estimate the extent of organic conversations about the brand. You ask, how often did you talk about this product and service within the past month? Companies tend to vastly overestimate this. Companies like to believe that customers talk a lot about products all the time, but look at your personal life and you will probably realize that it happens pretty rarely that you actually talk about a product. So in this example, we assume that we have 1 conversation in the past month for every 1,250 customers. Well, and then we do some very simple calculation. Our company has 30 million customers. We know that we have 1 conversation for every 1,250 customers. If we have 30 million customers, we divide it by 1,250. That means we should have had about 24,000 conversations in the past month. We know that 8,000 customers have been acquired primarily due to word of mouth. We divide the 24 by the 8 and we get 3. This means every customer that got primarily acquired through word of mouth was the receiver of 3 word of mouth messages from 3 different customers. And in the last step, we need to ask the question, how much incremental word of mouth do we think the program can generate? Let's say we assume there is a 10% increase in conversations. So we go up from 24,000 to 26,400. That's 2,400 incremental conversations. We divide it by 3 because, as we have calculated in step 3, every new acquired customer requires 3 conversations in order to be acquired. That means a 10% increase in conversation should have given us 800 incremental acquisitions. And then we multiply the 800 with the average CLV, we take away the program cost, and we come to the word of mouth program value. Now, if you use the more complicated approach of agent-based modeling, you can actually develop a series of recommendations about how word of mouth programs should be designed. Questions that you can answer is, should you target opinion leaders? So people who have a lot of connections, those people who have 20, 30, 50,000 followers on Instagram, or random customers? Should you target people who already consume the product a lot and who therefore generate high revenue? We call them revenue leaders, or random customers. Should you launch the product sooner rather than later? Should you do it online or offline? Should you spread it geographically across a country or be localized? Should you provide an incentive or not? And the article in the pre-reading gives you an answer to these different questions and also explains a little bit how this concept of agent-based modeling can be